California Center for Ag Health and Safety. I'm thrilled to introduce someone who probably all of you know. This is Leslie Alvarez. She used to work here with us, and so she's just one of our favorite people, and we're thrilled to have her present about her graduate student work in the Department of Nutrition. And this is a project that is at least in part funded by the center. And so I'll turn it over to you, Leslie.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So, as you mentioned, my name is Leslie. I'm a second-year master's student in the graduate group in nutritional biology. And today I'm just going to be giving an update on a project that I've been working on called Food Security and Nutritional Status among Agricultural Workers in California. And specifically, this project is focusing on iron deficiency and anemia. I'm going to talk a little bit about how our protocol has developed, where we are now, and where we plan to go in the future. So I know this audience in particular is aware that agriculture is kind of a big deal in California. But for anybody who doesn't know all of the specifics, so California produces over half of the fruits, vegetables, and nuts grown in the United States. They're also the sole producer of over 13 different fruits, vegetables, and nuts. And they're also the nation's largest dairy producer. So California produces about 1/5 of the nation's dairy. And then a little bit about the population that we're working with. So most of the farm workers in the U.S. are Hispanic and primarily speak Spanish. Majority of them are male with an average age of 38 years old, and mean and median incomes range between $17,500 and about $20,000, with an average wage of $10.60 an hour. So these stats relate a little bit more to what I'm looking at. So it was reported in 2016 that about 14% earned less than $10,000, and 33% of farm worker families had incomes below the federal poverty level. 54% of workers said that someone in their household or themselves use at least one type of public assistance program. Now, when it comes to food security, our project is focusing specifically on California. And so the California Institute for Rural Studies reported that 47% of agricultural workers in Yolo County alone were food insecure, and that's 3 times the rates that are found in all of the US and within California itself. In earlier studies that they did, they found that 66% of workers in Salinas were food insecure, and in that same study, they also saw that the mixed tech workers who participated in that study were at much higher risk of experiencing food insecurity and hunger. And then another earlier study that they did found that 44% of farm workers in Fresno were food insecure. And this is really important because food security can lead to diets with low nutrient density, which can eventually lead to micronutrient deficiencies. And so when it comes to healthcare, about half were reported that they had health insurance, but the most common reported difficulty to acquiring healthcare was that the healthcare visits were just too expensive. When it comes to overweight and obesity, it's pretty well known that the Hispanic community and other minority groups in general struggle with overweight and obesity. But studies have also showed that the farm worker community actually struggles with this a lot more for various reasons. And so why do I want to look at iron deficiency and anemia? So before I get into that, I kind of want to make a distinction between iron deficiency and anemia, as they do tend to get confused with each other. So iron deficiency is just when the body doesn't have enough iron, the adequate amounts of iron that it needs to function. And anemia is when the body does not have enough healthy red blood cells circulating. And anemia can be caused by a lot of different things, and iron deficiency is just one of them. And so when a person is depleted in iron so much, and iron deficiency is chronic enough that it can result in anemia, that's known as iron deficiency anemia. But another one of the forms of anemia that we're looking at is anemia of inflammation. So this is anemia that can be linked to excess adiposity. So basically, fat cells, which were once thought to only store and release energy, have been found to be actually very metabolically active. So these fat cells are releasing inflammatory cytokines, and these cytokines mimic basically the inflammatory cytokines that are released when someone has an infection or when you get a cut. And basically the body puts itself in a state as though it's experiencing an infection. So here, I won't go into too many details, but if anyone has questions later, I'm more than happy to talk about the specifics of these pathways. But basically, the liver releases a hormone that tells the body to stop letting iron enter the circulation. So if somebody has enough iron in their diet, or if they have enough iron stored already in their cells, whatever the transporter that allows that iron to go from the cell into the circulation, it's basically been degraded. So even if a person eats enough iron in their diet, the cell in the intestine is not going to bring the iron into the blood. And that's in response to those inflammatory cytokines that are being released by the fat cells. And so all that to say, basically, a person carrying too much excess adiposity is in higher risk of not having enough iron circulating in the blood, and this iron won't be available to make red blood cells, and therefore it can result in anemia of inflammation. And it's called anemia of inflammation because this is basically similar to, it's like the inflammatory response that is caused when you get a cut or something like that. It's the same cytokines that are being released in the blood as when someone's experiencing an infection. And so this leads me to talk about this thing called the double burden of malnutrition, which is when there is a coexistence with undernutrition along with overweight, obesity, and other diet-related non-communicable diseases. So basically, we have this situation where people are experiencing overnutrition because they have these new energy-dense diets, perhaps because of food deserts or many other circumstances that they're facing, but at the same time they're experiencing undernutrition because of these micronutrient deficiencies. And this is just basically highlighting how this double burden of malnutrition is an issue that's being recognized in various parts of the world. So we have people who are experiencing overweight, but at the same time we're seeing anemia and other micronutrient deficiencies, and this is a problem that's being seen in a lot of vulnerable populations. And so all that to say is that this is a very complicated situation. There are a lot of factors that are contributing to the outcomes that we're looking at, and all of these factors are interacting with each other. But we're going to be focusing on this. These are the interactions that this project is mainly going to be focusing on. We're not going to be really looking at pregnancy and work capacity, but I thought it was important to include because anemia has been associated with low birth outcomes and also increased maternal mortality. And work capacity is especially important with this population because anemia has been associated with reduced physical work capacity, and this population in particular really relies on their work capacity in order to make money. Okay, so a little bit about our study design. So this study is a pilot test of data collection protocol for a cross-sectional survey of farm workers 18 years or older living in California. Participants are basically going to come to 1 day of data collection where they'll do an interview, they'll get anthropometric measures taken, and a blood sample will be collected. And the target sample size for this project is about 100 participants. And so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I wanted to have them up there in case anyone had specific questions about the aims of this study. But basically, we want to look at the prevalence of food insecurity, iron deficiency, subclinical inflammation, overweight, and obesity among agricultural workers 18 years or older living in California. And we also want to look at how BMI, hemoglobin, and indicators of iron status relate to food security, specifically household food security. And we also want to look at the relations between iron status markers and BMI, and the relationship between hemoglobin and BMI. Oh, and lastly, we also want to look at if we find any differences between men and women regarding the above comparisons. And so this is just a summary of all the main things that we're looking at. Food security, BMI, hemoglobin, iron status markers. These are the specific markers that we're looking at, and inflammatory markers. We're also going to be collecting information on waist circumference and waist to hip ratio, and I'll talk a little bit more about why we chose to do that. And so participants are being recruited from many different types of events: health fairs, food distribution events, farms, churches, migrant labor camps. And in order to participate, they need to be at least 18 years of age. Agricultural worker needs to be their main occupation, and they can't be pregnant if they're a woman. They can't be experiencing a fever, and they can't have participated in the study before. And that's an inclusion criteria that we added a little bit later because we realized we were going to different events, but we were going to areas that are located near each other. One limitation of this study is all of this, except for the temperature, is self-reported, so that's one thing to consider. But we try our best to go to different locations. And so once we determine if someone is eligible, they do a 20 to 30 minute questionnaire with a bilingual interviewer, and that interviewer stays with them throughout the whole process. They take anthropometric measures, we collect their blood, and then at the very end, the interviewer goes over their blood results with them, and we also give them a $25 gift card as a thank you for taking the time to answer all of our questions. And here is a picture of the poster that we use when we're recruiting. This is what we use to explain to them what the whole process is going to look like. We talk about why we're doing this study. We put it in 3 steps: interview, blood collection, anthro measures, and we also tell them what their rights are as a participant, and that they can quit at any time, and everything's confidential and all of those things. And so when we do the questionnaires are administered by bilingual interviewers. They ask about household demographic information, socioeconomic characteristics. We ask about dietary supplement use because we're looking at iron status. And we also ask about other potential contributors that can contribute to inflammation and anemia. And within the questionnaire, we also included a food insecurity experience scale. So this is a household level indicator, and it has a 12-month recall period. We did consider other indicators that had like a 4-week recall period, but because we're collecting data within different times in the season, we realized there wasn't really a good scale that measured differences within the season. So there's still a lot of work to be done in figuring out the best ways to measure food security among this population, but in the end we ended up going with a 12-month recall. And then for anthropometry, so we are taking height and weight for BMI, and we're also taking waist and hip circumference for waist to hip ratio. And we decided to add waist to hip ratio because, as many of you may know, BMI isn't the best indicator of adiposity, especially since it doesn't consider muscle, it doesn't consider fat distribution. So waist to hip ratio gives us a little bit of a better sense as to where the fat is distributed. And especially, this is really important because people who are carrying their weight more in their belly area are at much higher risk than people who are carrying their weight in their areas like their arms and legs of developing diseases that are related to obesity, so like diabetes and hypertension. Carrying the weight in the area where all your vital organs are located increases the risk of developing those illnesses. And that has to do with the inflammation that I was talking about earlier. And so when we collect blood samples, so when we collect blood samples via finger prick, and immediately after collection, we run the total hemoglobin test using this HemoQ machine. And that is a test that is used typically to assess anemia. And then also immediately after blood collection, we run the hemoglobin A1C test using this DCA Vantage analyzer. And that test it's typically used to assess diabetes. We don't need it for our study, but we thought it was important to include because a lot of the workers were interested in learning this number in particular. In fact, some workers even told us they wanted to participate solely because they wanted to get their A1C results. So we thought it wasn't beneficial for the community to include, but it's not part of our analysis. And then after we run those tests, we continue collecting a few drops of blood into a microtainer, and we centrifuge that on site. And then we store the plasma in a cooler to freeze later, and then we're going to use that plasma to run a multiplex immunoassay to look at the iron status indicators and the inflammatory biomarkers. And these are some pictures of our makeshift lab and one of our study sites. We were really lucky that day. We had both a washer and a dryer. Sometimes we don't even have a table. So once they're done with their interview, taking their anthro and their blood, we have the interviewers, they basically go through all of their results. They talk to them about their BMI, they talk to them about some health risks associated with their weight. They give them their blood results, their total hemoglobin and their hemoglobin A1C. They're told what their number is and whether or not it's in the normal or abnormal range, but we make it very clear that it's not a diagnosis because we're not doctors. So we also give them a list of local clinics in their area in case they have any specific questions about their results, and so they can get more information since we can't diagnose them. But we do give them their results and tell them what range it landed in. And then another thing we would like to do is we want to provide collaborators with a summary of iron deficiency and anemia prevalence in those communities. This would really depend on how many people we get, how many people participate from those communities, but it would be something we would like to do sometime in the future. And then, for right now, we've contacted quite a few study sites. We visited places in Parlier, Watsonville, Firebaugh, and Knights Landing, and we've collected data for 28 participants so far. I included this picture because I thought it really highlighted the need of food security in this community in particular. So this is a community in Watsonville. It's a food distribution event. And I took this picture about an hour before the event even started, and the line was already going all the way down the block. And this community is particularly made up of indigenous workers who are recent arrivals from Oaxaca. So I thought it was really important to highlight the need here, because a lot of the times we'll collect data and we may not get the most accurate representation as to what they're experiencing, but when we see it here, it becomes a little more obvious. And so what's next? Here we have a few study sites that we've booked so far. Some of them we're still figuring out the dates. But yeah, so we'll be going to a lot of different places in California, and we're also exploring opportunities for a secondary analysis to answer some of these questions through existing data sets. And that's about it. I went through that very quickly. Oh no, last but not least, there is an outreach component to this project that I felt was really important to include. So we're going to be offering nutrition classes for the sites that collaborate with us. We've already had a few express some interest. These classes are going to take place in the spring, and we're going to be focusing on My Plate by the USDA, and we're going to be using curriculum that was revised by UC Cooperative Extension. They did a project that included more than 200 Latino consumers, where they learned about what are the types of foods Latina, African American, and other women are serving their families, and they came up with a more picture-oriented curriculum. So instead of teaching them with something like this, they'll be using things like this that are a little more culturally relevant. So that's the curriculum that I plan to be using for these classes, and they're going to be very depending on the situation. They might be an hour long, or they might be 15 minutes long to 30 minutes. It really depends on where we are and how much time they give us. But it won't be I won't use it exactly the way that they provide it. And that's about it. And this is a picture of our beautiful all-women team. And this is at a study site in Knights Landing. And I want to give a big thanks to the Western Center for Ag Health and Safety and the Blum Center for Developing Economies for providing us with funding for this project. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? I went through that very quickly.
So what we're going to do is we'll have questions for Leslie, and then Teresa Andrews, one of our outreach leaders here, is going to talk about another study that's happening at the center. But first, questions for Leslie.
Leslie, I'm curious, is this a population where you're visiting, where they're used to people coming to ask them questions? Or is this really new for them?
Some they are used to it and some they aren't. For instance, when I went to Firebaugh and one time in Watsonville, I actually had some workers recognize me from a previous study I was involved in. So they seem to be used to having people. In fact, they even thought they had participated in this study already. And I told them, no, it's different. I'm just the same person. But a lot of the workers in Watsonville had never experienced something like this. So it's really a mix.
And are the studies mainly about obesity? The other studies, or?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
The one I was involved in was about heat illness prevention, but
okay.
Specifically with farm workers.
Mm-hmm. How are you selecting your sites?
Anyone who will let us come. So that is a limitation of the study, in that it is a convenience sample. But we're basically looking for sites where we know a lot of farm workers will gather. For instance, some of our future sites that we're going to, they're basically two different churches in areas where it's known that a lot of farm workers attend these churches. Some of the health fairs were specifically catered towards farm workers. We did go to one farm while they were working. So we try to pick events where we know a lot of farm workers are going to gather.
So you mentioned it's a pilot study.
Mm-hmm.
What are the plans for? Are you piloting the instrument, or okay? And
yeah, so we're piloting the protocol, and we're trying to do some exploratory analysis. So far, we haven't found a PhD or master students that will pick up a larger study, but yeah, so it's basically testing out the protocol and seeing if we can learn anything from the exploratory data.
okay. And compared to the earlier food security data that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
you're including the iron component this
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah, so the two main pathways that we're looking at is food security, which can lead to iron deficiency due to low nutrient dense foods, which can ultimately result in iron deficiency, anemia, and then we're also looking at the pathway where obesity can lead to inflammation and then also lead to anemia of inflammation. So we're looking at the different, how all these things relate to each other and how they all ultimately lead to anemia, but we want to learn a little bit more as to whether or not this is an issue that needs to be looked at in this community. Because when I was conducting my literature review, I did find some studies done in other countries as well as in the US looking at inflammation and obesity and iron status and anemia, but I didn't see anything done with this population in particular. And so I thought that was important because of all of the factors that this population has to deal with that basically suggest that this population would be at high risk of dealing with this issue.
My question was about the questionnaire. Do you have any diet-related questions other than the food insecurity? I mean, are you like, I don't know, other studies may have got short, because I know nutrition questionnaires can go on pages. And
Yeah, that was very difficult. So we had a fat screener and a fruit and vegetable screener. It's actually the same screener that was used in the Pasos study. We ended up removing the fat screener because we didn't think it was accurately, it wasn't giving a good sense as to the type of fat that it was screening for. So, and it was also wasn't very practical because it took very long and the workers were having a hard time understanding it. So we decided to remove that and we kept the fruit and vegetable screener. So we are getting a bit of a sense of their diet, not as much as we would have liked, but we are asking diet-related questions.
So 2 questions and then one question and a comment. The question is, I actually don't know a lot about the implications for being anemic, other than maybe for a soon-to-be or pregnant woman. What are the long-term health effects if you were to find this population to be at high risk of anemia?
So, poor birth outcomes is one of them. Work capacity. So basically, having anemia is you just don't have enough red blood cells carrying oxygen throughout the body, and everything in the body uses oxygen. So a lot of things can go wrong if you're not carrying enough oxygen in your body. We have some. Do you guys know a little bit more about the specifics of?
I'm just remembering that fatigue is
that's the main
a
one
big
that's coming to mind.
thing, and I think it can get very dangerous if it goes on and becomes severe anemia. Which you don't want, but I think fatigue is the biggest one.
Yeah, and especially with this population that's out and having to work a lot, they're going to be at higher risk of developing heat illness. Any defense that the body needs to do to cope to the environment, it's going to be weakened. So in general, it just causes weakness in all parts of the body.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see whether there's associations or increased risk due to that combined effect. You talked about wanting to give the communities sort of a community level picture of their health status. Have you looked at the California Health Interview Survey neighborhood data? Because CHIS has the statewide data that you can look at by zip code at minimum, but then I think they now have a section that is down to neighborhoods, and I'm not sure if they break that down by census tract or what, but for especially some of these larger areas like Salinas, you might be able to get some useful information there. I think that when you add in the occupational component, you won't necessarily be getting a perfect match, but it might allow you to tell a bit of a story about those communities.
I actually hadn't heard about that. The data that I had looked at was the NHANES data.
Yeah.
And they did show, I think there was a 14.4%, that's what they found for iron deficiency in Mexican American women, and they found 8.5% anemia classified as iron deficiency anemia in Mexican American women. But I imagine that the numbers would probably be higher because they weren't looking specifically at farm workers. And although men are less likely to develop anemia and iron deficiency, I imagine that this community is at much more risk of malnutrition. So I haven't looked at that data in particular, but I'll definitely take a look.
My question is a hematocrit, and you use it to define anemia, right? there's different levels. So you also mentioned that chronic inflation can cause anemia. What about other inflammations?
Yes.
So I presume you've got those sort of questions on the questionnaire too about injuries and other chronic inflammation like heart disease, I imagine, like whatever makes C-reactive protein go up.
Yeah. So we also, anemia of inflammation, sometimes you'll hear anemia of chronic disease as well, because inflammation can be caused by it can be caused by a major injury, and if you're hospitalized, you'll have inflammation throughout that whole time because you're fighting all kinds of infections. But with chronic diseases, also a lot of inflammation. It's part of the reason it exacerbates diabetes. A lot of these things are linked together. But yes, so in our questionnaire, we do ask about chronic diseases. We do ask about if they're exposed to pesticides, but that's still really difficult to measure because pesticides can cause inflammation.
Yeah, I was just thinking like farm workers, they might have more injuries, or they might get bee stings, or anything else that might cause some inflammation. So it might be worth making sure you note that as a factor.
Yeah, we also they're also dealing with a lot of dust, so there can be inflammation in the lungs. So this population in general is at risk for a lot of inflammation. But we're hoping that because we're looking at two different types of iron status markers, that kind of will help us distinguish between the anemia of inflammation and the iron deficiency anemia. So we're getting a little bit of a picture, but it's so hard with this population because they deal with so many different things that can confound these issues.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Leslie. Okay, so now Teresa Andrews is going to speak about an ongoing study that has been here at the center and in the Department of Public Health Sciences for quite a while, led at first by Diane, and then myself with Teresa have been working on it, and it's an obesity and diabetes prevention study among farm workers. And so Teresa is going to talk about the educational sessions that she developed.
So hi. To give you some background, the project is called Pasos Saludables en español, or Healthy Steps. These are the hands of the workers that inspired this program. The program came along because there is a grower, I think it's the largest grower of berries, strawberry, all kind of berries in the world. And they have a clinic, and in the clinic they offer exams for the workers. And they realized many of them were malnutrition, and diabetes also was very prevalent in the population. So they approached the director at the time, Mark Schenker of the center, and the owner of the company, Carla Ryder. They talk and say, what can we do? So Mark designed the project. This project has been through different stages, as Heather said. The first couple of years, it was a pilot funded by the company. So as I say, Mark Schenker designed the project, and they did anthropometric measurements. They took blood tests like BMI and all those things. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the implementation of the educational sessions. This project was implemented in Salinas, Watsonville area, Santa Maria, and Oxnard. So the curriculum is based mostly in the Salud para su Corazón, Your Heart, Your Life project. This is a curriculum that the National Institute of Health put together, and they pilot us in different Latino communities in the States. The problem with this is to be taught by promotoras, like in community clinic settings, and each of the sessions they have lasts for about 2 hours. So that's a luxury we don't have in the field with farm workers. So what I did, I took the information of this curriculum, and I put it together in the framework of a social media campaign that was being implemented in Mexico City, and then expanded to the whole country. But it's called the Cinco Pasos. That's why our project is called Pasos Saludables, because it's like a merge. So in Mexico, they have the 5 steps, and I link the steps to the hand because I say everything, all the wisdom you need is in your hand. So each of the fingers is linked to one of the steps. The first one here is muévete, and it's like move, exercise. So I'm going to be explaining more about the content of the sessions, but that is the first step. The next one is drink water. Eat fruits and vegetables. Measure, and it's the waist circumferences as well as the portions of the size of what they are eating. And then the other one is like share with the people you love the good news you are learning about health and all those things. And with these steps, you can have a healthy life forever. So the structure. I trained some promotoras to conduct the sessions in the field. As I say, the original curriculum, it was sessions for two hours. So I did review everything and took pieces together with the promotoras, and then we say these are like the pills of knowledge they need, really the heart of the session, because they only have half an hour in the field. So when I was designing this, I worked with them and measured the time to be able to conduct this presentation, the heart of the information, in 10 to 15 minutes. So we time it. Whatever was not able to fit into that time, we move it or accommodate the session in order for them to be able to do that. So the promotoras received like a table that was structured in this matter. Everything, the title of the sessions is a dicho or refrán, like a saying. It's a very Mexican cultural sensitive tradition because it's like a wisdom that you say in a phrase, and you will see when I review the titles. Then in the same table, they have the objectives, the materials the promotoras were going to need to prepare for the class, what they need to do prior to the sessions to get ready, and then conducting the session. In the conducting the session part, the table was divided in 3 columns. The first one was the time allowed for that activity. The center was the wider column. It was like what we suggested for them to say, or as I told them when I was training them, review this, understand the concepts, and then say it in your own words. So it was suggested the way they could organize their thoughts when they were talking to the participants. And the last column was the material needed for that specific topic. So it was time, content, and materials needed. And that was part of the conducting the session. These are the dichos. Like, it's hard to translate, but the first one, quien mal anda, mal acaba, it's something to say, if you behave badly, you are going to end badly. And in this is for them to learn about the 5 steps and why is that important. If you don't follow healthy steps, your health is going to be impacted. The next one is, don't live for tomorrow what you can start doing today. And that is like, okay, be healthy, and don't say, oh yeah, next year, new year is coming, things like that. Do it now. Commit yourself to be healthy now. The next one is like, if you don't measure what you are eating, it says, de golosos y tragones están llenos los panteones. So as you can hear, even if you don't understand Spanish, it's kind of a rhythm in the say. So it's for them, it was, or for everyone in the Latino community, it's easier to remember what the information we're giving them when they is in this very well-known dicho. In that one is about portion. The next one is about salt, because salt is an issue. A lot of the people, because they are working so hard, sometimes they don't have the money to prepare vegetables and things like that, even though they are working with vegetables sometimes all day. When they go home, they stop by the fast food restaurant, and very cheaply they have food. But that food has a lot of salt. So in this one, we teach them like how much salt is hidden in the food they are eating. The next one is about sugar. Atole is a Mexican drink or Latino drink that is kind of thick and heavy. because it's thickened with harina. How you say harina?
Flour.
Flour. So, thank you. So I have to be thinking in both, and sometimes one is kind of fighting to come out. So the atole is like, if you have your blood very heavy as the atole, is not healthy for you. And we talk about diabetes. Es mejor prevenir que lamentar. It's better to prevent than to be sorry. So if you start with your healthy habits, you're not going to have bad health. And we talk about the energy to work and all those things. The tal palo, tal astilla, that is from the parents' behavior is going to reflect in the kids. Because we were informed by the local staff that the kids were having already problems with obesity, and some of them were borderline diabetics and all those things. And so we want to reflect with the workers that whatever they are passing with no words, just by habits, is very important for the kids. All of the others is about portion control, about healthy choices and things like that. But again, everything is like linked to the dicho, and we close with the el que persevera alcanza. So you keep trying, you're going to reach your goal. So we think that the way we developed the materials, it was a good training experience for them, because it gave a break. It was kind of fun. The materials, and I'm going to show you some of the materials, it was kind of attractive. It was really linking to whatever they knew already. It was easy to understand. It was not using very high language. It was very clear and to the point. And they were participating in there. At the end, they played like a lottery, but all the cards were about BMI, sugar levels in the blood, all those things that was important for them to know. And they understood all the concept. That was the best part. As I said, it was in the fields. In here is they are being weighed. It was a question or two. The classes, the sessions were in the field, and some of them were already trying the fruits and vegetables in the fields. What the company was trying to do, part of the questionnaire was talking about their well-being in general, mental well-being, because you can tell a person, you have to do this, you have to do that, but if the environment is not conducive, it's going to be very hard to go against the current and do, because I have to do. So if they don't do, they may feel guilty. But what the company was trying to do is to balance and create a healthy environment by doing that kind of potlucks and things like that, for them to try new flavors and new cheapest way to eat healthy. The company also worked with the food banks, because sometimes when the poor people go to food banks, what they receive is not really nutritional. It's going to kill the hunger, but it's not going to be like healthy for them. So they were working with the food banks to try to offer healthy options. At the end of the sessions, they were 12 sessions that were conducted between 8 and 12 weeks. They received a certificate and they have a celebration. As I say, the celebration was the game, the bingo game, like Loteria. And at the end of that game, they received the certificate. So now, I'm going to show you some of the materials. Like this, is just a balloon with water? No, this is your heart. And if your heart is pumping really hard, what is going to happen? So see, it was a very cheap, practical way for them to see the size of the heart, the pumping of the blood. Yeah. Sorry. Can we take this somewhere? Or? Yeah, I think hold it up. We can turn this off. How can we do it? I can hold it up. Yeah, I'm going to be stepping, taking things in there. So.
Press it twice.
This is just a whiteboard. We never brought down the screen.
That's a light.
Thank you. So see, this one is for them to understand about diabetes and digestion. So we say, what is the reason you want to eat? And it's because you're hungry, huh? Whatever you are eating, you bring it inside your body through the mouth, and it's when the digestion starts. So, from where? From the mouth, where it goes? People, where it goes? It goes to the stomach. I think it goes like this. So, I have not done this in a while. If I misplace something, you don't see that. So the stomach is like your blender. Everything that comes into your stomach is going to be mixed with liquid that is produced by the stomach. So the stomach is working to blend everything. So in your bodies, even though you see how everything is very solid and strong, we are made of tiny pieces called the cells. And the cell is where the food needs to go. Oops. Okay, but I cannot bring like a tiny piece of taco and all those things. So that's why the stomach has to blend everything. After all the food is processed, is going to be glucose. Thank you. The stomach sends the glucose to the blood, and it's going to be traveling, and then it goes going to the cell to bring the food. But if you notice, there is a keyhole in there, and the glucose doesn't have a key. So we need to bring the insulin. It doesn't have the this one has. The insulin is going to hug the glucose, open the door, and the food can go into the cell. But where the insulin is coming from? This is the pancreas. The pancreas, oops, is behind the stomach. And the pancreas is a factory of the insulin. So all of this I will not follow, but is the way with kind of cartoonish things. This is bad habits, good habits, healthy factory, not very healthy factory. And other things like for the cholesterol, this cholesterol is very dry, but this is Play-Doh. And we use the cardboard inside the paper towels, and that is the artery. And then the cholesterol is clogging the artery. Bad cholesterol. It's a thief. Good cholesterol is the champion. So as you see, sometimes we saw farm workers in the field like, no, I don't want to learn. No, this is my lunchtime, I want to rest. But when they start looking at these kind of things in this way, they kind of start like moving closer, and they ended up like learning the session. So everything was like playful, very visual, and they are analyzing the results, but it works. We are seeing improvement in the habits, nutrition habits, physical activity, and that was the hardest part for us to explain why after being very physical work all day, why they need to exercise. And the way we did it is like you're doing it for your heart. It's not the same pumping because I'm working, I'm stressed, like rhythm in the exercise and your pace. So you are strengthening instead of forcing, stressing. So this is how Pasos saludables work. Again, when we have the results, maybe someone could come and talk to you about these are part of the bingo games. So I created this with the dichos. So, and they have the homework or whatever they were learning, go back with coworkers, with family, with friends, and teach. And that's it. So as you see, this kind of goes with Leslie, what Leslie's trying to do. Because, yeah, the people that are giving us good food are the ones that have less chance to eat healthy.
So this is a good example. Teresa is our lead educator here at the center, and this is a great example of the way that she teaches and develops content around different topics. This one focused on obesity and diabetes. Any questions for Teresa?
Is Ryder still supporting that?
Yes. The promotoras are still going. It's not the same structure. They modify it because just economical reasons, but they are still having campaigns like healthy steps and things like that. And they offer aerobics. They pay for an instructor to come, I think twice a week. And the workers that wish, they have the class for free. They organize, I think, twice a year walks, like distance, like 5 miles, things like that. And they encourage